Welcome to this lecture on geometric universe, the holographic fractal matrix. Who here believes we're living in a matrix? Okay. Maybe after this will change. Let's see. Let's see. I'm Heike. I'm from Germany. I actually come from a scientific background. I studied biotechnology, and I did my PhD in biology ages ago. And then I went into yoga and spirituality in India, and I was completely fascinated by consciousness. And that's where I met this guy, Colin Power, who's not here today, but he's an unbelievable genius. And I realized that he had a lot of interesting knowledge to share, and so I decided to work with him. And I thought, wow, this knowledge, what he has, it's so revolutionary, and it just connects all of the dots of information that I'm really, really passionate about, which is science, spirituality, and the clue here is it's art. And art is like a tool to understand the world, and that's really beautiful. So it means that the universe is not so complicated. It's geometry, for sure, but geometry is visual. And because it's visual, even children can actually comprehend some of the very, very complex things, like quantum physics and stuff like that. So in this lecture, I would like to show you how geometry actually relates to all of these layers of reality. You can see already in the image, kind of starts like a dot, and then there's like these 3D shapes, the 5 Platonic solids, and then goes into the atom, into the cells, into the earth, into, the larger scales of the universe, the solar system, and the galaxy. The talk will be a 5-part lecture, so we're just going to go into some introduction. What is sacred geometry? Why geometry? Where does geometry appear? Why is this so important? And then something very specific to us, because actually I've been working on geometry for the last 10 years, and with Colin Power, and we came up with a new geometric theory of the universe. And what's very unique about what we're doing is something we call the 5 realms, and how this translates into a new Platonic solids model. And this is actually the basis of how actually shapes start to evolve, and that's a very key point here. I'm going to explain to you the nature of the holographic fractal. I mean, that's going to be a little bit heady, so I'm just going to warn you. There's going to be a point where maybe it will pop your brain. So just keep a mind on that. And then in the end, we're going to wrap it all up in like, wow, this is the geometric universe, from the smallest scales to the larger scales and consciousness itself. Introduction, yes. So, why geometry? I mean, you just need to look around. Look around in nature. Imagine you would know nothing. You had no idea about nothing, and you just open your eyes, and you look at the world, and what do you see? You see patterns. You see trees that all grow through a very specific mathematical function. They divide into 2. You see, this is a very beautiful example. This is the Romanesco broccoli here. Is it working? There. You see how every single part is the whole. Like every single part reflects the whole. And that's actually what we call a fractal. A fractal is a self-similar pattern on every scale. So it just repeats. And it just shows us something about nature, that there must be some sort of mathematics that describes these patterns. This is like the Nautilus shell, it's a spiral. Here we see hexagonal patterns. This is in a snowflake. Flowers, they have a lot of shapes like pentagons. This is also based on the spiral, the sunflower. So why? Why does nature do that? And actually when we go back in time, into our ancient history, and we look around the world, actually all of the old cultures, they all had quite incredible knowledge about geometry. We don't know so much anymore what happened back then. The only thing we know is they left something quite incredible behind. They had these massive pyramids. I mean, we all know about the Pyramid of Giza, but this one is Chichen Itza in Mexico. I was actually there a few months ago. And what's so crazy is you stand in front of the steps and you clap, and it just echoes back. So they didn't not just know about how to build these geometric constructions, they also knew about sound. And they knew about the stars. So also the pyramids themselves, they're not placed randomly, by the way. There are some studies that suggest that actually the pyramids all around the world follow a grid. And the earth itself has like a geometry. And somehow they knew about this also. Yeah, there's a part of history when it goes very, very far into the past. Let's say like we're talking 8,000, 10,000, maybe even beyond that. Because there was an ice age, and the first symbols they found were actually also geometry in the caves and so on. What's quite interesting here is that a lot of the ancient cultures use these big stones, these megaliths. And yeah, it's quite a debate still today, like how did they manage to do that? Did they just carry that with elephants? Did they really? Or did they use some sort of advanced technology? Actually, there's something interesting about sound. You can levitate things with sound. So just some knowledge on the side. But there is some sort of common notion. All these stone circles, there's many, many of them all around the world. They all depict very particular geometric proportion. And these proportions are related to our own body, they're related to the stars, and they're related to the energy field of the earth. And what's quite amazing, or let's say a very significant stage in our history, was ancient Greece. So of course we had knowledge all around. We had it in Mesoamerica, we had it in China, we had it in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, India, of course, cannot forget India. But really, knowledge comes and it's forgotten. And then it rises again and remember it. And there was a very, very crucial moment, which was here. This is the ancient Greeks. And the ancient Greeks, they were philosophers, they were mathematicians. They brought some of these old concepts into, they collected the knowledge. And that's what we learn today in school. If you learn geometry, really the basis of all of that is the ancient Greeks. But the difference is, the ancient Greeks thought about geometry as kind of like, it's the language of the universe. It's like an idea of understanding. There must be something like a plan, like a divine plan. If you study mathematics today, unfortunately, we don't ask these questions anymore. Why is it like that? Why are the things all connected? And in the end, it is a philosophical field when it comes to geometry. And it's not just geometry, it's music, and it's astronomy, and pure mathematics, which actually are all wrapped into something we call the quadrivium, which became the basis of, later what we call science. But on the other hand, when we go philosophy, spirituality, and religion, even religions, all around the world, if you look at the temples and churches, cathedrals, mosques, they are all geometry, all of them. And here we find some very significant symbols. This is the Dharma wheel in Buddhism. Of course, we all know about the cross, Christianity. This is the yin and yang, the idea of duality, the Star of David in Judaism. And this is the Ankh, obviously. This is ancient Egypt. So the question is, how is that, the religion, which is all about consciousness, and then science, which is all about logic, how do we combine that? I mean, in the end, we're living in one reality. And what I found very difficult sometimes, when I studied science, we never include ourselves, We're looking at reality and we can measure things, but actually, you are a consciousness. You are looking at it from a central experience, and you have to include that in the equation. So this is where we come to the study of what we call metaphysics. This is a very beautiful analogy. This is from Plato, ancient Greece, and he came up with this story. He said that, imagine you're in a cave all your life, and you've never seen anything else. You're a prisoner, unfortunately, and the only thing you can see is the cave wall, which are shadows. So only the thing they see are the shadows on the wall. They don't see behind them. They don't know what's going on. And they think that the only reality that exists is this, is what they see on the wall. And there's a moment that one of the prisoners goes out and is free, and he can look outside the cave and like, oh my God, the reality is so much different. There's so much more. And he goes back and explains to them, look, did you see that? This is amazing. And they don't believe him. Of course, they don't believe him because they're ignorant. And so geometry, in a way, is the study of metaphysics. Meta means beyond. Yeah, so when we're looking at science, we're thinking about the world of matter, the things that we can touch, the things we can measure. But actually, and you'll see in a moment, the world of matter is a very, very, very tiny, tiny portion of all that exists. And even our senses, you know, what we can see, what we can touch, what we can hear, is so small. We actually don't really experience the whole reality. And yet, somehow, something exists within the metaphysical realm that gives sense to the things that we do experience, because everything does follow some sort of rules, some sort of mathematics. And so when we talk about sacred geometry, really what it is, it's like, and this is a very mind-boggling concept actually, we cannot measure space, okay? That's very difficult to understand because we are experiencing space, of course. We're here in space. This is space, right? But the only thing we can measure are the things in space. So you're right there, and I'm right here, and there's a space in between. So between objects in space, we can measure. And that kind of determines what space is. So the perfect analogy is this glass of water. Imagine you would not see the glass. There's no way you can measure the glass. You cannot, because it's nothing. It's not a thing, right? The only thing you can measure is the water. And when you do measure the water, this water may have a form. So the question is now, does the glass exist? What do you think? Does the glass exist? If you cannot measure it. But if we can see that the water has a shape. And that's where we go into the idea of metaphysics. It's like you try to understand the mechanisms behind the physical reality that give the physical reality its form, its function. Yeah? So that's why sacred geometry, in a sense, is kind of beyond physics. It's kind of like the reason why physics exists. Sacred geometry actually is a very, very new term. It's just been coined in like the 80s, 70s, I think, by some energy healers, channels. People have been, you know, downloading some information. But actually, it was there all along. If you see all around the world, we have this very particular symbol. It's called the flower of life, and I'm sure you've seen it on the festival like millions of times. You can see it everywhere, especially like when it comes to spirituality and so on. It's a very ancient symbol. You find it in India, in Turkey. This is actually pretty interesting, this one. This is in China, in Beijing, in front of the Forbidden City, and this is the claw of the lion, which is known as the protector of knowledge. So he's holding the knowledge on a sphere with the flower of life. And this one is probably the oldest one found, so you can Google that. It's found in Abydos, Egypt, and it has been somehow lasered. I mean, there's debate about it, but it has been lasered into the wall, and it's about 4,000 years old. So when in the 80s, some people came along and said, actually, those ancient symbols, they have a lot of meaning. And if you want to understand how geometry describes the world, well, maybe the information is actually hidden in there, and the ancient cultures knew about it. So I'm going to show you now how this pattern actually works. Because a lot of people don't really understand what's actually the progression. It's so simple. Like anybody can draw this with a compass, and you see how simple it is. Really, you just start with a circle, and then the circle starts to expand. This is the seed of life, 7 days, and it goes into the flower of life. That manifests the fruit of life, and then you can connect every node with each other, and that creates the Metatrans cube. And inside of the Metatrans cube, you have all of these crazy shapes. They're 2D projections, but they actually exist in 3D. It's like a shadow. This is a cube. Now that's interesting because this is actually inside, it's projected inside. We'll talk about this in a moment. Simple, no? Actually, it's very simple. It just started with a circle, and then you just repeat the pattern. So you draw another circle around it. You actually draw 6 around 1, which creates a seed of life. And then, actually, whenever you create more circles, every time they overlap, it's like another dot. And every dot can be connected to each other, which creates more and more information. So when you get to the flower of life, you got a lot of dots. Then actually there's 2 more stages that we termed, because actually nobody called them different than flower of life, but there's a huge difference between 19, 37, and 61. So we called it the moonflower or flower of light, and that has certain reasons. The flower of heaven, and which is 61, and that's when the fruit of life comes out. And these are 13 circles, and when we connect every center of the 13 circles together, we get to the Metatron's cube. And the Metatron's cube is kind of like a 2D blueprint, like a plan, you know? It has all of the information inside to create the multidimensional reality. And here we see just a bunch of them, a bunch of the geometries that are hidden inside, but actually they're much more. There's much more geometries than just that. And they also repeat on many scales, which then we come to the idea of a fractal. Yeah, what is actually a fractal? One of the key things that made our exploration of reality very unique was the idea, okay, we're sitting right here right now, and actually right now I want to just maybe do a little small meditation with you, because I would like for you to experience that as well. So if you can just find a nice spot to just relax, and just slowly close your eyes. Maybe take a deep breath in, filling your tummy, your chest all the way up to your head, and relax, exhale. Just really relax your head. And just become aware how you perceive reality right now. You're breathing in and out, expanding and contracting. You're sitting upright on the surface of the earth. And you're following the symmetry up and down, left and right, front and back. You are a dot at the center of your reality. And imagine this dot can now expand in all directions like a sphere. And it could expand forever. But the sphere can also contract. It can contract to the center of your experience, your dot, also forever. So right now, you are a dot, surrounded by a body, sitting on the surface of the earth, between the infinite large and the infinite small. And you're experiencing reality through 5 senses. And just concentrate maybe on the things you can hear. And you can hear all these sounds. Maybe it gives you a sense of space and distance. And now concentrate on your smell. What can you smell? To the sense of taste inside of your mouth. What do you sense? Sweet, sour, salty, bitter? To the sense of touch, to feel your body touching the ground, how gravity pulls you down. Maybe you feel tense. Maybe you feel really good. To the last sense of sight, and even though your eyes are closed, what do you see? And from this 5 sense reality experience, which is really just a bubble, you're now going to lift yourself up mentally, outside of your body. You're going to elevate in space and see yourself from the top. And you're going to move further away from your body, further away from this room, outside. You can see the whole festival further away. You may see the whole of Croatia, the whole of Europe. And now the horizon line, which separates above and below, becomes round as you're crossing the atmosphere. And the earth is a circle. And it becomes smaller and smaller as you're experiencing the space in the solar system, passing the sun. And yet even the whole solar system is like a bubble, getting smaller and smaller. As you lift yourself outside of one of the spiraling arms of the Milky Way galaxy, and you see the whole galaxy surrounding a dot, until even the galaxy gets smaller and smaller, until it's just a tiny dot. Take a deep breath here. And now we're going to journey back where we come from. We find the dot of our galaxy and it blows up. And we see the spiral. We're finding our solar system like a sphere. We're passing the sun, coming back to the earth, which is just a tiny dot. And it gets bigger until we're crossing the boundary and the sphere becomes a line. We're coming back to Europe, back to Croatia, back to the festival, back above your head, until you're landing on your head and getting smaller and smaller. And you see the realm of cells like circles, and you're crossing the boundary of a cell, and inside you see the molecules, and you get smaller and smaller until you reach the realm of the atoms. It's just like a sphere until you pass the atomic shell and you come closer to the nucleus, a tiny dot. Take a deep breath here. And now slowly we're moving back, away from the dot, crossing the atmosphere of the atom, into the cellular realm and back to our body, back to the scale of where we are. Between the infinite small, the boundary of the atom, the cells, and the infinitely large, which we perceive as the solar system and the galaxy, the 5 realms. One last breath. And on the exhale, welcome back and open your eyes. I hope you could feel that. I hope you could experience that. If you're high or not. If you're high, maybe even better. I don't know. So, let me just come back 1 sec. Right now, we are here. Right here. But our body is made out of cells, which are billions, trillion cells. I think 43 trillion or something. Each one of those cells is a unit. And each of those are based on atoms. Just as we are a cell on the planet, and the planet is part of the solar system, which is part of the galaxy. And what's really interesting here, there's a shape. And the shape is called the torus. It's kind of like happening, it's created when you take a dot and you expand the dot into a circle, and the circle collapses in a dot, but you do this in a higher dimensional space. So we're going to do this together, so just also to wake you up a little bit, yeah? So just put your hands on your heart, like a dot. And then I'm just going to show you what we're going to do is, we're going to say the word torus, but we're going to move our hands up. Okay, 1 second. We'll do it together, okay? 3, 2, 1. Torus. One more time. 3, 2, 1. Torus. Yeah, really stretch it out. And last time. 3, 2, 1. Torus. And really, you have to turn around as well. Now we don't do that, but when we go on the dance floor, okay, just do that, yeah? You can dance the torus. And it's such a fundamental form, because this field is a 4th dimensional field. It's 4D. And it exists on all of these 5 realms. So we were talking about our perception of reality, and actually, really, we can't go lower than the atom. I mean, we can talk about, you know, the nucleus and, you know, how the nucleus is built up and so on, but really, as a unit, the atom is like the end. And then we cannot know what's smaller. But actually, it goes infinitely small. And the same goes to the large scales. We have the galaxy, and then, I mean, you could say that they're bigger clusters and structures, but as a unit, you're reaching kind of the end of what we can perceive. And really, we just do that with technology. But all of these realms, atoms, cells, the Earth, the solar system, and the galaxy, follow the same shape, the torus. And it came with this idea, that actually this idea of 5, you know, we have 5 senses, we have 5 realms that we experience. There's also 5 elements. So the ancient Greeks, they thought that the whole world we experience are based on 5 elements, which is just like earth. Earth is like solid, yeah, something we can touch. Water would be like anything liquid. So yeah, liquid. We can actually transform almost any element into those 5 elements. And then we have fire, and we have air, yeah, so gaseous elements. And the last one was a little bit tricky one. It's called ether. And the ether, some people call it like it's the space. But as an element, you could call it, you know, it's electricity, really. It's something that we experience as an electric shock, you could say. Of course, today we know that we have much more elements, yeah? I mean, I study science, so I know the periodic table of elements, and it's like 81. But what's quite interesting, they thought that the 5 elements are related to these 5 Platonic solids, which you can see here. And we're going to talk more about it, and that they actually represent these elements. So we also have 5 senses, 5 realms, and actually even 5 ecocycles, like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and so on, that actually keeps everything alive. So somehow there's a limitation of 5. And it goes back to these Platonic solids, and we have actually changed this model, and that's very crucial, because I think that has been a big key for us to understand how this holographic matrix actually works, because you need to understand the order of things. So these are the 5 Platonic solids. This is the octahedron. Octa means 8, yeah, 8 faces. of the triangle. And then the other one is tetrahedron. Tetra means 4. It has 4 faces, triangle. And the cube, we all know the cube, okay. Some people call it the hexahedron because it's 6 faces. And then the dodecahedron, okay, 3, 2, 1. Dodecahedron, dodeca means 12, and it has a pentagon. And the last one is the icosahedron, okay, 3, 2, 1. Icosahedron, and it has 20 faces of triangles. So each of those Platonic solids are really unique. Why? Okay, I give you a little bit of a example. If I take a circle, okay, and inside of a circle I can make an equilateral triangle. Yeah, so I choose three dots, and they're all the same distance, and it's inside of a circle. And I can now take the next number, like 4, and that's a square, and it's still inside of the circle. Now I can go 5, it's a pentagon, it's inside of the circle, 6, hexagon, 7, 8, 9, yeah. I can go on into infinity, and actually in the infinity, I will create the circle. So this means that in 2D, we have an infinite number of shapes, regular, which means they're all in equilibrium. But when it comes to 3D, how many 3D shapes are like that? What do you think? Is it infinite? Also? No. How many? 15? It's actually 5. It's actually these ones. So that's really crazy if you think about it. In 2D, you have infinite shapes, but when it comes to 3D, somehow space is limited. And that's really important when it comes to sacred geometry. When we study geometry in school, we study all these shapes and wow, there's like all these things we can make. But when it comes to the creation, the matrix, not all shapes exist. Or at least they come into existence in a particular way, which means there's a limitation of how we see space. And in 3D, we only have these 5. And that's interesting, because they were like the Platonic solids. Wow, it's just 5. We have 5 senses, 5 elements, and so on. Maybe there is a link. So what they did was, they said, okay, we're going to create a model where each of the elements will fit one solid. So what they did was, this one is a tetrahedron, and they thought it's fire. Why is it fire? Well, you know, like, okay, the fire is kind of like a triangle, so we would say it's a fire. Actually, they had no really reason, no good reason why they call it like that. But they did call this fire. They called this icosahedron water. The cube was earth. The octahedron was air. And then the dodecahedron, which was discovered very later, they thought it was the ether. Now, today, we know about atoms. And because we study the atom a lot, we started to see actually in the atom, you can see how certain shapes, these shapes, appear. And so what we did, we arranged this whole thing. We said, actually, no. The first one is actually octahedron, and I will tell you why. The tetrahedron is water, which basically is actually water, because H2O is a triangle with like 2 electrons, and they fit inside of this shape perfectly. The cube, we would agree, okay, that's air. Earth, and then the dodecahedron we thought is air, and then the icosahedron is ether. And when we look at it in this way, all of a sudden, boom, it was kind of like a key in a lock. It opened up our understanding how geometry starts to evolve. And that was so crucial in our research, because it was like, oh, now we understand. They all got it wrong. It was wrong, because they didn't actually know why they named it like that. And no, it's not actually the elements, just to be clear. This is not like, oh yeah, Earth is this. No, it's not. But what this is, it's kind of like the foundation of space. And when we're talking about how space is being developed, it starts to be developed from these 5 first. And then all the other shapes come into existence. So it's kind of like a foundation. And so the idea of 5 elements is rooted in this, but it doesn't mean it's this. It's kind of like more of a, metaphysical concept. And when we did it like this, and we said there's an order to them, you see how they actually fit inside of each other. Yeah, so we have the octahedron, which fits inside of a tetrahedron, which actually makes a star tetrahedron, so 2 together. Some people call this the Merkaba. This actually defines the cube. The cube sits kind of like that in the dodecahedron, and this dodecahedron sits inside of the icosahedron, and then the icosahedron can then again sit inside of the octahedron. So all of a sudden, you have a fractal, which means you can repeat the structure like Russian dolls. You can put them inside of each other, and then you can put them inside each other more, and you just build this kind of construct into infinity. And from here, we kind of made this model, because think about the Earth. The Earth, and this is not really science, it's more like metaphysical story, but it helps us remember. It helps us making sense of the order, of the sequence. So the Earth has a magma, hot magma, fire inside. So inside is fire. And then we have the oceans, yeah? So then there's water. And then from the oceans rises the land. And actually when a volcano spews out magma, and it touches the water, it actually creates earth. So you got fire, ocean, water, and then the mountains, yeah, earth. And then above the mountains, you've got the air, so there's like air. And then around the earth, we have this thing called the electromagnetic field of the earth. It's an electromagnetic. Actually, from electromagnetism, we create electricity, and we create magnetism. We create motors. We create everything that we today think is advanced civilization. So this makes actually sense that when we nest them in this way, that each of those solids are associated with a certain element, which basically gives us a new view. And there's another very interesting point as well, because when you do nest them inside like this, they fit inside of 3 spheres, one small one, then 3 fit in one, and then the last one fits in one outside. And actually what happens, think about our experience with elements. When we touch water, not water, when we touch fire, we get burned. When we try to touch electricity, we get a shock. So we cannot really deal with these 2 types of elements. But water, solid, and gas, they're okay, yeah? I mean, I'm not talking about, whatever toxic elements you want to use, but just generally speaking, we can interact with that, which kind of makes sense with this model. So fire is in a separate sphere, the ether is in a separate sphere, and then we got these 3 elements in the middle. Now, if this was a little bit complicated, the next one a bit more, but not to worry, everything will make sense after, yeah? So holographic fractal. Does anybody know what a hologram is? It's a projection. I love that. It's a projection. Somehow, the image gets projected, and it's usually projected, well, from the bottom, or it can be projected from the center. And in geometry, it's projected from the center, from a dot. And because everything comes from this sacred geometry pattern, which we saw in the beginning, you know how the overlapping circles create this flower of life pattern. But actually, you don't need to go so far. You can just go to the seed of life. And when we go to the seed of life, something interesting happens. You have 6 dots, and they create 3 vectors. And when you have 3 vectors, what you can do, you can rotate them into 3D. Because a lot of people think that the Metatron's cube, yeah, here, everything is in here, it's true. But how does it actually create 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, and multidimensional space? It needs to actually come into a higher dimensional space. So from a flat plane, what happens? One line rotates up and down, and the other 2 create a cross, like a 90 degree. It's all 90 degree. And when you have all of this 90-degree angle, like a 3D cross, which is basically you, yeah? So you have an up and down, front and back, left and right. It's you. It creates the octahedron from the inside. It's like you're connecting the dots from the outside to create the octahedron, or you're looking at it from the inside. So all of a sudden, this seed of life is the template to create the first 3D form, the octahedron. And a lot of people don't know this. This is very new knowledge. I don't think you can find this online, by the way, except from us. So it's the octahedron that comes into existence first, not the tetrahedron. Actually, when you have a tetrahedron, and you have like four balls, they don't make a pyramid. They want to make a square. They just don't, they're not stable. So the octahedron is first, and you will see now in a bit why this is true. When you have the octahedron, you have a dot inside, and now we have the projection. Because when there's a dot inside, this dot can now project into 4 directions. What does this mean? I'll just show it to you in 2D, okay? Here's a dot in the center, and when you project, it kind of flips out. You see? You all know this game, no? As a child. It's kind of like that. But it was a dot here, and the dot becomes the outside. this is actually the beginning of a hologram. You start to project the dot into, well, in 2D into 4 directions. In 3D, it would be into 8 directions. And when you do that, you create the star tetrahedron, you create the cube. That's how the octahedron actually creates the cube. It's quite interesting because geometric form, you know, they can all transmorph into these like crazy shapes. So when we have the octahedron can actually rotate. As you can see here, this is called a jitterbug, which is actually something that this really genius architect came up with, Buckminster Fuller. I don't know if you know him, but he's responsible for all these geodesic domes. And he studied actually how the octahedron transmorphs into the icosahedron, which is the middle one, which transmorphs into the cube octahedron, which is actually not a Platonic solid anymore, but you can see how these shapes all of a sudden can start to transmorph into each other. Yeah, you have a dynamic. This is actually what we call 4D. 4D is movement. Anytime something's moving, like even this rotation is a 4th dimensional movement. So you can see how the other shapes all of a sudden are created. So the icosahedron is created first, but then the icosahedron projects the dodecahedron inside. You can see here. Each of the corners project inside, and it creates the dodecahedron. Is that a little bit clear? Yeah, I know the shapes might not be so easy to grab your head around, but the message is very simple. From the seed of life, the reality gets rotated into 3D, and then the dot projects out, and then the shape transmorphs and projects in, okay? So it just, kind of like that. So we have a dynamic, and in a way, we need a dynamic. Without dynamic, you wouldn't have life. Life is a constant transmission of information. Yeah, even the atom, you know, even the shells, they transmit information. How does it do that? You have to understand how shape work. Shape create each other. Okay, so we're coming to the last part. How is this model now related to what we experience? Now, this was all very, very abstract, right? Very geometric. But now I'm going to show you that actually we have a lot of evidence. And the evidence starts in the atom. Actually, we built a whole model of the atom where you can see how we use the electron cloud. So this is the normal model that we probably learned in school. I don't know if you remember. So the Bohr model is a very simplified model of the atom. It's actually not how it looks like, but you have a nucleus, and they have protons and neutrons inside, and then you have around in shells the electrons. But actually, electrons are not like bobs like that. You know, that's a very misconception. Electrons create these probability fields, and it's really weird because we can measure where they are, but we cannot measure how fast they are. Or we can measure how fast they are, but we cannot measure where they are. It's kind of like starts to, yeah, the quantum mechanics is all based on this fact: what is actually the electron, and how does it relate to light as well? Because we know that electrons and photons, they actually can be transmorphed into each other. And anyway, there's this thing called the Schrödinger equations that create a new perspective of this electron cloud. And one of these electron clouds is much more complicated, but I just show you this most simple one. Well, the most simple one is a sphere, but the second one is called p orbitals, and they're creating these lobes. And how do you see a similarity to the octahedron? Actually, it's the same. We have an x, y, and z axis like a cross. You know, remember, it was rotating up and down, and it's exactly the same form. And it is the octahedron. It's the octahedral symmetry. It's like, remember the glass and the water? We cannot measure the glass, but we can measure the water. We can measure electrons, and we can measure protons. And when we measure them, what we find is they show us the geometry. And even more, when we start to look at, you know, how elements behave, and that's really crazy. Like, if you look at the periodic table, all elements react with each other except the noble gases, which are all on the right side. And when we look at noble gases, they are all octahedral except helium, which is a sphere. So neon is an octahedron. Argon is actually the next stage up of an octahedron. It's like a fractal. Krypton, well, that's where the d orbital comes in, so it starts to overlap. So here we see how the cube also plays a role. Xenon. And then radon is, well, it's radioactive, which means elements don't want to bind when they reach the shape. And actually, this is also true for a lot of the so-called exception rules in chemistry. They all fill a shape. It's cubic, it's octahedral, or it's any of the other Platonic solids. And that's where we can see the Platonic solids, the ancient Greeks weren't so wrong. They didn't know about atoms, and they didn't know how complex they were. They were much more complex than the Platonic solids. But the Platonic solids build a foundation from which all of these other geometries come into existence. And now we can see how this relates to matter. I mean, yeah, matter, the atom, I mean. And from the atom, we can build up molecules and elements. And here we see, and this is like molecular geometry, we see that crystals are geometric. We see that, all of these elements have a geometry. I mean, they're even called tetrahedral, but we would never learn it as a tetrahedron, unfortunately. And here is cubic lattices. Yeah, you can see how actually the Platonic solids start to reappear in all of these cellular, in the cellular realm. And when we go one more up and we look at the sky, remember this was 5 realms, there was a guy in the Renaissance period called Johannes Kepler, and he said, where there's matter, there's geometry. And he's absolutely right. All matter has symmetry. And when we go and look at the stars and we look at the solar system, what he did, he said, okay, I know the planets have certain distances. Now, how can you predict these distances? I can place these geometries inside of each other, and they create certain distances. And he came up with this Platonic model of the solar system, and he was quite accurate. I mean, he was like maybe a few percent out, like very tiny percent. But if you take the mean orbits of the planets, just as an example, Earth and Jupiter, so in the middle would be the sun, a dot, and then inside of the octahedron inside there's a sphere, and that would be the mean orbit of Earth. And then this octahedron is inside of a cube, which is inside of an octahedron, and outside would be another sphere, and that would be the mean orbit of Jupiter. Between 99.8 and 99.5% correct. But unfortunately, when it came to modern science, this was disregarded because it wasn't 100% accurate. And when we come to the very large clusters of the universe, I'm almost done, I promise. You have certain models. Actually, something you should know, science does not have a unified model of the universe at the moment. We don't have an answer to all of our questions. Actually, the models contradict. You can have a model for the quantum world, and you can have a model for the large scales, but you cannot have one model that will describe all. And yet you would have to have one model that describes all, because it's one reality. So we're looking for this unified holographic fractal theory of the universe. And when we look at the large scales, and there's something called the Eckharton universe, because there's so many theories, but this is one of them. And you can see how the galaxies start to cluster. And they cluster according to this shape, which is the octahedral grid. And that's where we start to bring all of the pieces together. It's like, well, if you have the geometry in the quantum world, and you have the geometry in the galaxy, and you have the geometry in the cells, and you have the geometry in the solar system, it makes a kind of a nice way of looking at the universe. It just shows us that there is a very simple pattern, and the pattern comes from a dot, yeah? And the dot creates a circle, and the circle creates this pattern, and it creates 3D, and it creates this hologram, and it creates Platonic solids. And those Platonic solids, obviously, I can't go there today, but it creates all these other shapes. And then this pattern repeats on all scales. So it's kind of like a fractal. It repeats on every scale, but we don't see the same pattern on every scale. We see like different aspects of it. And what does this then mean for us? It means you as consciousness are actually also surrounded by the same geometric grid, by the same blueprint. And a lot of the healers and a lot of the shamans and a lot of the amazing people, who study spiritual technologies, they knew about this. When you do energy healing or anything like that, it works with this field. There's a very particular meditation that people do, which is called the Merkaba meditation, which is actually not that one. It's more complicated. No, it's the yellow one, yeah. The yellow one inside, which is actually known as a spiritual vehicle. And you can, some people believe you can transcend dimension with that. And so there is this idea that you are a consciousness which is rendering reality within this multidimensional hologram in a particular way. You don't see all. You don't see the whole thing. You are only within a certain aspect of it. And there are certain, reasons also why this is. Because we're in the reality that we experience that is known as a cube. And the cube is a very specific one because it just can fill a space. And we need to understand if we're living in a matrix, if this is actually a coded program, then, and if we're living in a 3D reality, it must be uniform, It cannot be like one shape and then another shape, and it's like a hall of mirrors. I move my hand and my arm would be like, whoa. No, my arm is always the same, which means this program somehow renders every single thing in this reality through a very defined geometry, which in our case is a cube, but there are other shapes. Which means now, when we start to try to combine this with all of this ancient knowledge about religion and gods and all of this crazy mythical stuff, maybe it does make sense. Maybe there are other realities. And we as consciousness are within this grid to experience life and to choose every moment so we can evolve through this multidimensional reality so we can experience the next level of the game. Which means everything is based on how shape is working. And if we understand that this is how it works, it means that there is a purpose in life. It means that we are not alone. It means we're all connected. It means that it's an infinite, beautiful pathway in this multidimensional reality, and that we need to learn from this. Because when we start to apply this in our life, it shows us how beauty is. It shows us what love is. It shows us that there is morality. It shows us that there is a divine plan. It shows us that this is not for nothing, that this is not just bullshit, that I can do whatever. No, that actually everything is coded. Everything that you're thinking, everything you're saying, everything that you're feeling is somehow registered, is coded, and is recreated in your reality so you have the experience you need to evolve. And I think for me, this is the most important message. We can understand about reality, how it works, yes, but what does it mean for us? And that's the most important thing. What does it mean for you if you die and you know it's not the end? What does that mean for you? It means, wow, that's pretty cool, no? Yes, that there is something to look forward to, that everything has a reason, that life is amazing, actually, and that you are on this infinite journey to discover yourself within that matrix. And that one day, you become like a god. You become quite powerful, and we already are. And so I want to leave with that kind of spiritual message that, if we don't have a sense of this information to make a better world, what does it mean, We need to think about how can we improve ourselves in all levels? How can we create new technology based on this stuff? I'm sure if you look at any kind of science fiction, there's always geometry in there. If you want to travel the cosmos, you will have to know this. If you want to know anti-gravity, you will have to know this. If you want to channel, you want to have to know this. You want to be a really good artist, you will have to know this. And we already do. A lot of people don't really know consciously, but you are somehow intuitively already applying it. So these are our two books. If you want to know more, in particular, how this kind of works, I've tried to give you today as much as I can in like 1 hour, so you get a sense. Don't worry if you don't get anything, like the whole picture, because geometry is geometry. In the end, you need to touch it, you need to feel it, you need to create it, you need to have a drawing compass like Leonardo da Vinci, you need to get yourself into it, you need to meditate to it, you need to move to it. Then you understand. But if you do want to know more, me and Colin have been writing this book, Geometric Universe Beyond Space and Time, and we actually try to explain to you the whole fractal hologram. And what's quite amazing about what we're doing, we have a new mathematical system that we developed. It's a new axiomatic mathematics, and it gives some revolutionary answers. I don't know if any mathematicians are in the house. No. Yes, one. Do you know the continuum hypothesis? Do you know the Riemann hypothesis? No. Okay. Well, in mathematics, there's like the biggest, really big challenges that we don't have an answer to. Yeah, it seems like that within the geometry, within the mathematics of the geometry, we may have an answer to these questions. And that is quite amazing. So if you want to know more, Geometric Universe, you can get it online. And if you are not so technical minded and you just need an introduction, I wrote this book actually 2 weeks ago. I published it. It's a Hello Geometry, which just gives you a nice introduction how geometry is actually found in all of these things and how it introduces you to the subject of sacred geometry. With that said, thank you very much for listening. Woo!